Hey y'all, so I make the best cookies ever. Yes, I'm tooting my own horn. I make the best cookies ever, and I'm gonna show y'all how to make them. But before I show y'all how to make them, I'm gonna show you how to measure, okay? Because that is like one of the most important things. This is like, once I buy flour and sugar, I just go ahead and pre-measure out my ingredients because that's basically all I use flour and sugar for is baking. So I'm gonna show you how to measure before I actually show you how to make the cookies, okay? So the first thing y'all need to know before you're baking is the difference between a liquid measuring cup and a dry measuring cup, okay? When you're baking, you have to have precise measurements. Like if it calls for 1 cup, you have to level it off and have exactly 1 cup. If you're trying to measure flour or sugar or anything that is solid in a liquid measuring cup, there's no way for you to know that you have exactly 1 cup. So that's why you definitely have to have the right utensils. And when you're measuring liquids, you want to go eye level so that when you pour, you're stopping exactly at the line, okay? So that's the first tip. When you're using measuring spoons, which is a small amount, you can use this for liquids or for dry ingredients. And another important thing that you should know is the difference between a tablespoon and a teaspoon. So if the recipe has a big T, it's a tablespoon. If it has a little T, it's a teaspoon. And that is very important in baking because if your recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of baking soda or baking powder or salt, which are leavening ingredients that'll help it rise or help your cookies lay flat or whatever it is, and you put in a tablespoon, then you have tripled the amount because it's 3 teaspoons and 1 tablespoon. Okay, so you got to pay attention in math and you got to know your numbers a little bit when you're baking, because the difference between baking and cooking is baking you have to be precise. Cooking, you can kind of stop when your ancestors tell you to stop, but when you're baking, you got to level it off and you have to have the exact amount. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to show y'all how to measure properly so you can get it right if you're making anything from scratch. Now, for this recipe, I'm making white chocolate macadamia cookies, and I'm also making chocolate chip cookies. Now, one of the mistakes I made early on in baking, and I've been baking cookies over 20 years, is I was using dark brown sugar. When you're baking cookies, unless it specifically calls, or anything that you're baking, unless it specifically calls for dark brown, if it says brown sugar, automatically go with the light brown sugar. And the thing about brown sugar is it has molasses in it. That's why the dark brown is darker, because it has a higher molasses content. So when you're measuring brown sugar, you want to pack it in. You don't pack anything else. Like when you measure your flour and your granulated sugar, you don't pack it in. The reason that you pack in brown sugar is because it has molasses and it's sticky. So when you're measuring your flour and you're measuring your sugar, you want it to be a heaping amount, like over the actual measuring cup, so that you can level it off. And when you level it off, you're going to use the flat side of a butter knife. That's what I use, a butter knife, and then I scrape the extra off. That way I know I have exactly 1 cup. So for this recipe, it's called, well, actually, both of these cookies, they call for 2 1/4 of a cup of flour. So that's what I'm measuring. And you see how I'm just scraping it off. You would not be able to get the perfect measurement with such precision if you were using a liquid measuring cup. That's why it's important to know your utensils and have the correct utensils. You can't wing it like when you're trying to bake, because baking is a science. Which brings us to the leavening agents. So this right here is the baking soda. Baking soda, baking powder, yeast, let me see what else. Yeah, those are the main leavening agents that we use in baking, okay? And that's why it's important to know the difference between a tablespoon and a teaspoon, because although they are little, they are mighty, okay? So if you mess up the measurement on a leavening agent, it will completely alter the outcome of your cookies. They may be too flat. They may not rise at all. Like if you're making a pound cake, your cake may not rise if you don't measure them out properly. Okay, so you have to know the difference between baking powder, baking soda, and salt. They're all leavening agents, and you're not going to use a lot of it. Usually it's about 1 teaspoon, a half a teaspoon, something like that. Okay, these are very important, and this is why you have to measure properly. So because I bake so much, I like to just measure all of my ingredients out at once. And then when it's time for me to make some, I don't have to do it over again. But I wanted to show y'all the proper way to measure and tell you the importance of making sure that you have the exact measurements when you're baking. Tomorrow, I'll make you a video and I'll show you exactly how to make the cookies. But first things first, you need to know how to measure. I hope this helps, and I hope you make some real bomb cookies. But I'm going to show you tomorrow. Okay, bye.